Hello, everybody. My name is Rajiv, and my pronouns are he, him. Whether you identify as in recovery, sober curious, or just wanted to be sober while you're listening in, we're happy that you're here. Let's get started. Okay, well, uh, today is probably the most queer, sober, social thing that we could talk about. Um, it's basically around the idea that you thought you were straight or you that you might have had a specific gender identity or a specific sexuality, and then you stop drinking, and for one reason or another, you realize you're probably not what you thought you were before. Even though that this is not my personal experience, I still find it really interesting because it is something that is tying uh, the actual use of a substance to one's actual sexuality or gender identity. I think that that's really interesting. I think it's a really important day today. It's my pleasure to introduce our very first guest on this podcast, a longtime member of Chicago Queer Sober Social Group, Brian Keane. Great. I think that that's it's really amazing for us to have Brian on here because they'd like to share a little bit of a story around something around their own experience, the use of substances in the past, and just their own gender identity, and kind of just identity overall. I think it's a really interesting story to talk about. We'll then also make sure that we have a story coming from our very own Carly to talk about her own experiences in a similar way. And so just make sure that you're listening through to both because I really feel like that'll be an interesting, mix of experiences. So without any further ado, I definitely want to make sure that Brian, you get your chance to speak through everything. So here you go. Floor is yours.
more, it's the word I like to use, but sinister turn. And it became more about masking negative thoughts I had about myself and masking, a depression that, don't quote me, but, I think a lot of LGBTQ individuals experience. Drinking may have created the illusion that I was fitting with everyone for a time, where I was, quote unquote, one of the boys. But that's exactly what it was, an illusion. It almost kind of, movie spoiler here, I'm sorry. It kind of reminds me of the movie Coraline, when at the beginning, the world she was going into was so wonderful, but the more time she went back, to get more of those pleasures, it started to rot from the inside, revealing how it actually wasn't as good as she thought it was. Well, my drinking was pretty much just that. Excuse me. The thing that once made me think I was connecting with people, meeting people at bars and talking with them and making new friendships, it was really doing the opposite. I started to really lose authentic connections with people. And so kind of, fast forwarding into 21, one really bad drinking episode gave me almost a 2-day hangover. And for me, that was absolutely it. Like, I just couldn't do it anymore. Now, this was back in March at the beginning of a pandemic, so everyone was, was kind of encouraged to be drinking at home. And to be honest, the transition to living an alcohol-free lifestyle was rocky. I'm not perfect in any way, and it was very rocky to say the least. But upon starting my journey, I started to really challenge everything I knew about myself. I mean, a lot of people who know me or knew me at the time and myself, I literally tied alcohol to my identity, and letting go of that, I'm not going to lie, is still a challenge for me. I would say the biggest fear in starting to live a sober lifestyle was FOMO. For those of you who don't know, it means fear of missing out, especially at gay bars. I mean, think about it. We live here in Chicago, and we have Boys Town, and the image of gay life here in Chicago is centered around our bar and our drinking scene. So like, how would I meet people? How would I have fun? And so in late February, early March is when I found out about this group. And I have to say that a lot of those fears that I had about FOMO have completely subsided. I think as a gay person, we're expected to act a certain way. And when I mean like acting, I mean drinking culture. And it's been really refreshing to not have to live up to that stereotype with this group. And I would say, some of the things that I love that I've really started to learn and that we preach in this group is that, you are queer enough, you are sober enough. And those were huge doubts that I had about myself. Like, if I stopped drinking, if I stopped, having Cosmos and mimosas at brunch, would I not be gay enough? Would I not be queer enough? And obviously, we know the answer to that. So I'm not going to, claim to be perfect. It's all a journey. I'm learning this, like my first year of, practicing and living, a sober lifestyle. But it's just been so refreshing. And, coming from a human perspective into all of this, I'm starting to accept myself for everything, like the good, the bad, the ugly, because that's just what makes me as Brian. With all that and all the craziness, I just live by the mantra, keep calm, carry on. But honestly, getting sober has been one of like the best decisions I've made in my life. And I don't question that at all.
Thank you, Brian, for because I think that that's a really interesting to hear how much you were trying to really fit into a specific way of existing, just kind of not knowing what other options are out there. And I know that that's probably a very similar story for a lot of people, whether that is for their own, sexual identity or gender identity or what it may be. It feels very familiar, at least for me. What I would like to know a little bit more about is just like where you kind of find yourself now. I know that you said that pronoun wise you're kind of open to whatever people might want to use. but I'd be kind of interested to see like is how much has that actually changed time between like drinking, kind of figuring out there are other options out, and then deciding to live as it's not been that much time, so there's probably some exploration still going on. But interested in just seeing where your head is at right now.
No, that's an awesome question, Rajiv. I think one of the coolest things with, exploring my identity, with, getting sober in a way is like, before I had mentioned I was really putting myself in this narrow box. And once you're able to understand that, how you present or gender expression in that sense, it is like, I can't even say it's a linear spectrum. It's truly all over the place. And I think that's a really cool thing because it's like an oddly liberating thing. So that I'll be honest, I have been going through so many different, I don't want to say identities, but I've been saying like, I prefer this pronoun right now. I've really been experimenting with where I think that I should be, in the way that I identify. But to be honest, I think it's going to be a lifelong thing figuring it out because I think gender is an evolving thing too. It doesn't just, it changes over time. So right now, I would probably consider myself, I don't want to necessarily say fluid, if that's the right word. Like I identify as obviously a biological male. I identify as a guy technically, but it's like the whole being constricted with pronouns and how you're able to dress. I can't put a label on it. I can't put it into a box again. So it's just an ever-changing thing with me right now. And who knows, maybe one day I'll find something that I'm like, I can sustain this long term. But right now I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's probably the best that you can do. But I definitely appreciate you sharing some of your story and some of that exploration with us.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on and giving me the platform to share it.
Of course, Brian. I'm literally so excited that you're our very first guest. I'm so proud of you and your sobriety and how far that you've come in just the short time that I've known you, because literally when we met, it felt like we've known each other our entire lives, past lives, future lives. So very, very cool. Like those are the kinds of friends that you get to make when you are sober. I relate a lot to when you said how much drinking was a part of your identity. And I was curious if there was any like moments before that like 2 day hangover where you were like having enough of the drinking. Like, were there any signs before that where you thought you might have a problem? You did remind me of that one meme where it's like hangovers at 21 and it's a person like running on the treadmill at the gym, and then it says hangovers at 27 and it's literally a person getting an IV at the hospital, because that's also very relatable. So I feel like you were that meme, but were there any signs before then? Any clues that you might one day want to get sober?
Absolutely. So, I would probably say for me, number one were the hangovers. They have this term called hangxiety for a reason. It's so bad. It just, you sit in bed all day and you're depressed, hungover, dehydrated, head hurting. And I just couldn't take it anymore. But like in the actual while I'm drinking aspect, I am someone, you guys know me pretty well, and that, I like to crack a few jokes here and there, and I'm pretty, straightforward with things, but I can be a pretty mean person when I'm drinking. And that's not something that I'm really proud of. Obviously, I don't think anyone's proud of being mean, but, I would say over a year and a half, I started noticing changes in relationships with people that I know or knew at the time. There are friendships that I no longer have anymore due to drinking. I just become, and I think it's the person that I become when I'm drinking is not the person who I really see myself as. The drunk Brian is narcissistic, selfish, uncaring, bitchy, whereas sober Brian is just bitchy. But I just became like this person that I didn't want to be, and then I just started seeing it take a toll on my physical health. I mean, one thing very few people know this is that I suffered really bad from GERD. So it's like heart, it's almost like a heartburn, but really bad. Well, since quitting drinking, it's like completely gone. I mean, that's just like on the physical level of it. But, I'm also a pretty big advocate for mental health, and I've pretty much come to the conclusion that really alcohol and being healthy mentally, they just, for me, they can't they can't exist with each other. One has to exist or the other one has to exist. So obviously I chose better mental health because of that.
For sure. And I think that that's a really important thing to notice, is that just where you made that choice and how you made that choice. I think that that's something that I think is pretty important for other people to hear, really. If we're kind of thinking about other people just generally now, is there any sort of advice or sorts of things that you might want to tell others who might be trying to question their own relationship with their own sexuality or gender identity, or how they fit into the queer community, and their own relationship with alcohol?
For sure. So I feel like that's kind of like a two-pointed question because they're two very different things. So
Sure.
I'm just going to start with the alcohol, and then I'm going to go to the identity. When it comes to questioning your relationship with alcohol, I feel like ultimatums just don't work. I would say, it's very fashionable for millennials to do, dry January, sober October. Give yourself a month to not drink and see how you feel at the end of it. And, taking it, in increments. I mean, it just, I would say that helped me originally. And if you're really questioning your alcohol use, it's a great first step to just say, just for this month, or even just for this week, if you don't feel like you can even do that. It's all about baby steps when it comes to being healthy mentally and physically. When it comes to the gender identity and sexuality thing, is you really have to free yourself from shame. I think our society kind of, they kind of make a joke out of people who are gender nonconforming or, don't act, a certain way. And I feel like when you are able to tell yourself, I am valid, I'm a valid human being, I'm worthy, I deserve this for myself. I think once you're able to have that kind of mindset, it makes exploring your gender and your sexuality a little less intimidating, if I'm making sense with that.
It does.
Yeah.
No, for sure. And that makes perfect sense, because it is complicated. It is incredibly complex. And in fact, just trying to define it sometimes is a struggle. And trying to make sure that you're pinning down exactly what you're talking about at any one moment can be difficult. So I can definitely appreciate that. I think what you're saying around making sure that you just don't have any shame around it is really, really important, because that just kind of blocks our ability to even recognize what is there. And instead just kind of, puts an extra layer on top of it that probably doesn't help anything. And so that you're kind of finding ways to get rid of that, or at least manage it or pay attention to it. I think that that's really important. So,
I mean, shame is just a giant anchor. So you put it perfectly, Reggie.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for sharing. I want to make sure that we have enough time for Carly to also share her story. I think it'll be an interesting thing to compare against yours, Brian, just because of where Carly's coming from. Because you're coming from an angle of feeling like you didn't fit into, or you were trying very hard to fit into a specific set of labels or boxes or expectations that were put upon you. And I think Carly's story is just a little bit different. So, Carly, do you want to take it away and maybe tell your story?
I do. And thank you again, Brian, for being so vulnerable and sharing with us. I think that your story is so relatable, and to get sober in the midst of a pandemic is super commendable and not easy. But it just goes to show anyone who's listening to this, like, there's another way. There's always another way. You don't have to succumb to all the pressure of society, and you can get sober in the
Mhm.
middle of a pandemic. It is possible for you. So, thank you so much for being here. And I'm really excited to share my story because I haven't really talked about it, I guess, like chronologically, like this in public. And I think even a lot of people in our group haven't heard this part of my story. So I'm very excited to tell it. So, for those of you that don't know me, I essentially grew up very straight. I was very femme. I did competitive cheerleading for all 4 years of high school, and it was pretty much I was this way because I really thought I had to be this way. I thought I had to be super girly, super preppy, and I was just socialized to believe very deeply that I needed to find a boyfriend and then get married and then move to the suburbs and then have a house together with a white picket fence and pop out a few kids and get a few dogs and call it a life. And that really sounded like my own personal version of hell. And I was just very confused how other people around me that were living this life were happy and seemed okay with it, because I was very much like, there's no way that these people can fully believe that this is like the epitome of happiness. And if that is your story, like, there's nothing wrong with that. I just really just didn't understand. I really thought people were genuinely faking it because I couldn't get with the program. It just didn't feel like it was meant for me. So what helped me really ease that tension and feeling like I couldn't live this life that was subscribed to me was drugs and alcohol. And so while I was dating my long-term high school boyfriend, which I was supposed to be doing for fun, I would also be getting drunk and making out with my good girlfriends, for fun, and flower playing truth or dare or whatever, just like to get boys' attention, or just to do something different that wasn't the life I was supposed to be living. And it kind of just felt like this little thing that I was doing just for me. So essentially, I created this double life for myself, because I thought it was the only way. So fast forward a few years later, I was working as a front of house manager in a restaurant at the time when I found out that one of the female chefs that I was working with, she said I was her type. And that information, because I had never thought about like a woman looking at me like that or thinking about me like that. And it really just planted this seed that evolved over the next multiple months as we became closer friends. And it was just a really interesting, like, eye-opening experiment for me. I became closer with this woman, and she happened to be sober. And so while we were first hanging out, I was not sober, and I made a fool of myself multiple times, like super embarrassing. And she was still always there for me, and was didn't really. I mean, she understood because she was sober, previously had issues with drugs and alcohol. Um, she understood, but she didn't leave my side after these really embarrassing moments happened. And because of that, it really made me look at myself and see that I really wanted to be close to her because she was sober, because I didn't understand how to do that, and that that was an option for a life that I could also lead. So I really find her. And because she's really this like first sober person that I have become close with, it really changed my like view of like myself, of what a sober life could look like, of what, not being straight could look like. So all of this kind of came in like one giant package for me. And I did end up like getting sober because she was in my life. And I it was crazy because we became really close, and we started to become more than friends. And I had to reconcile all these feelings that were going on, the feelings that I wanted to live a sober life, like, and dealing with that, which early sobriety, like Brian mentioned, is not easy and comes with a lot of emotions. And having a lot of emotions of, okay, I think I'm growing feelings for this girl that I've never felt this way before, and having to reconcile that not going with the plan that I was told I had to live the life. So it's a lot of things coming up all at once. So that is kind of like the epitome of my like sobriety and sexuality really came like wrapped in this one giant gift for me. So I know that everyone's story isn't like that. But that is kind of, I think I was ready, I think I needed like a life raft, to get out of the life that I was living because I was not okay, going on the way that I was going on. And I kind of saw this as like a way out. And along with it came these other feelings for her. So I had a lot to deal with, in my early sobriety.
I think
That's
that's
for sure.
super interesting because like there's so many parallels with what Brian also shared because they're coming at it from the box of just being a gay man, whereas you're trying to break out of the box of being a straight woman, and that, while similar on the face of it, and the way that it kind of came about for you feels a little bit different. Especially since it was kind of wrapped up with this relationship with this woman. How did you really feel when you learned that she was sober? I know you mentioned about it, but I kind of like to learn more.
For sure. When I met her and I found out she was sober, and after like we had gone out multiple times and I didn't even realize that she wasn't even drinking or drugging like the rest of us were. So when I found out, I was like, "What do you mean? You were out with us? Like, didn't you party with the rest of us like that night? Like these XYZ nights?" And she was like, "No, like I don't do that anymore." Like she had been sober for, about a decade, and just it was really confusing for me because I had never been close to someone that was sober. It just wasn't even on my radar. It was
Hmm.
really foreign to me. It was like trying to understand an alien from outer space. And I was just like, how do you do this? How are you a sober person in the world? Like, it didn't make any sense to me that you could just choose to be sober. But something about her and this lifestyle just really intrigued me. And I just really desperately, I didn't know why or how. I knew I wanted what she had. I didn't know if I was ready to do the work to get there or what it would entail. Just something about it really intrigued me, and I just wanted to be close to her. I wanted to know her. I wanted to know how she did this, like went out and was sober. And she was, willing to be there for me, willing to be on the other end of the phone while I'm crying my eyes out, not knowing what I'm going to do next or how I'm going to make it through the next like minute sober. But to really have someone as, even if it was just a small support system of one person that I could confide in, it made such a huge difference in my life. And it was also important for me that she had seen me not sober on many
Hmm.
occasions, but was still there for me, and that she actually preferred me sober, which was like a totally new concept for me because I didn't even prefer myself sober at all. So
I sure.
I can feel that. I get that. Carly, so you brought up like so many great points. I love your story because it's just so relatable with so many people. So just looking back at your time as not a sober person and when you were drinking, um, finding out who you are, do you think that, drinking just like masked these feelings that you had before? I mean, looking back, do you think that you've always been feeling this and drinking really masked it for you?
so you mean my sexuality?
Yeah.
I would say, like, clearly, I was curious, and exploring, even just being curious with experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And I kind of think it just goes hand in hand with like trying to find a way out of this box that I was put in of needing to be straight and live this like Disney fairy tale fantasy thing. But it just wasn't happening for me. So with that, to also kind of rebel, I would, experiment with my sexuality, only doing it with close friends. And I thought I was only doing it for the attention of my male friends. Later on, I realized that, I didn't have to be under the influence to kiss women that I wanted to kiss or have crushes on women. And I really, once it started happening like up close and personal to my face, where I was having this relationship with a woman and I couldn't deny my feelings for her, were more than a friend, and our hanging out date like kind of turned into dates, and it was more romantic, and I was starting to fall for her because she was courting me, and and it was wrapped up in my sobriety, which became very important to me. So it kind of all became very blurred, but I had to really sit and reconcile like the way that I'm feeling about this woman, there's nothing wrong with that. even though it felt like it was, because that was everything I've been told. So I really just had to like reconcile with the fact that I have I have power in the situation. I don't have to do this narrative that has been sold to me my whole life. And like that, bursting that open just changed my whole world, because I realized, wow, I can literally do anything. And that is like the whole foundation of what my sobriety was built on, is like if I can get sober, I can, and I can get sober and come out of the closet to myself and to everyone else around me, like I can do anything. So it really was just like this really, really powerful message for me overall.
I think that that's a really interesting take on it, because that desire to eat, or that like, you know, finding that realization, I guess is the best word, that realization that you could just, do it all different. Not necessarily have that like marry a guy and move to the suburbs, like have a white picket fence, that kind of progression. The fact that you kind of found out that that was another option, you choose not to do that. I think that is super important and really interesting to see how that came about. What I think that I'm personally curious about is just because like I haven't had issues with drinking in the past. Like it's just not something that I've done ever. But I'm more curious about just, and I know that this is like a big giant question, but like how you actually got that same sort of realization with that level of sobriety, where you didn't have to be drinking all the time or didn't have to decide like go out like that all the time.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge question of how did I want to become sober? And I think honestly at the beginning I did not want to be sober.
Sure.
I wasn't happy about it. But at the same time, like how it came to be was that I didn't really have a choice. I really had my back up against the wall at this point in time, where my tolerance was through the roof. Drinking wasn't doing it for me anymore. Like my coping mechanisms, my self medication was not working. It had fully stopped, and I stopped having fun, and it was just pretty awful. And I was like, there has to be another way. And it just honestly started out as a tiny experiment. I was like, let's just try to be sober for one day. Just
Mm.
one day. I didn't want to be sober for that one day, but I also couldn't keep carrying on the way that I was going. So I just tried. And the next day I was like, okay, let's put our head down and try again. And honestly, it took about 3 months of just putting my head down and staying sober and avoiding drugs and alcohol and avoiding people, places, and things where I'd be around that. And finally, after 90 plus days, you kind of just have this click. And I know Brian has had it too, since we've talked about it before, that your mindset changes from I have to be sober, I have to be sober, and all of a sudden just like a switch flips and it goes, I get to choose to be sober. I get to choose to be good to myself and my body. I get to choose this new life. I get to choose everything. Instead of letting alcohol and drugs dictate who I am, I get to put myself back in the driver's seat. And it's so empowering. And even though I didn't understand why or what I was doing for those first 90 days, once you get there, there's really no going back. And once your eyes are open to the dangers that you were putting yourself in, how alcohol and drugs affect your body, your sleep, your everything, your metabolism, your liver, like you can't go back with your eyes closed again. It's not possible.
That I think is super interesting. And Brian, definitely feel free to just jump in if you have any other like story or something you might want to add
No,
around this.
I was just about to say, like, again, I just love Carly's story because it's so relatable. And I mean, and I totally get what you're saying with the click. I mean, I was really against it too, but once you get into like the I get to be sober, I mean, we've talked about this before. The Sunday scaries are not nearly as bad. You take back your mornings, you sleep so much better, which gives you better mental health. I mean, it's one of those things that you can tell people about all these benefits, but like really until you start to do it, you know, that's when you get to really experience that. So I love your.
Well, no, thanks, Brian. I agree with you too. Of like, I tried to change my life. I would read every self help book and try to apply it, But if I'm going to go just pour alcohol on my life every weekend, like it was just erasing all of my goals. So to really just be able to come back and I like just I turned over every rock. I tried looking everywhere else in my life. I didn't want the problem to be alcohol. So I know that it's not easy to be like hearing about all these benefits and being like, oh, maybe I should do that. Because it was like, oh, I will try and find literally any other way to find these benefits that is not stopping drinking. And so once you go around the block and try all those things, and none of it works, and you turn over the last stone, and that stone says stop drinking, you're like, oh, like that was it. That was it the whole time. Like the one thing that I never wanted to look at because this is such a huge part of who I am, and like being terrified of what you have to give up in order to get the good stuff. It can be overwhelming, but at the same time, once you get to the end of your rope and you get there and you're at the point where you just have to, and there's no other way. But then you realize like, oh, this is the way.
And going like with what you're saying, that Carly is like, when you think that you're giving up something, you view it as like a loss. You almost mourn it, for a while. But the longer you go into it, it's like, I really didn't lose anything like that. I didn't lose anything worthwhile at all, So once you're able to just like get past that mourning phase and all that, it's great.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because like not only are you not losing anything like of value, you're also gaining a lot. Like certainly perspective, certainly control. Just feel that sense of empowerment is something that I find interesting. That just by simply choosing to not do something, all of a sudden you feel like you have so many other things. I mean, when I say it like that, it kind of makes sense. But I mean, still, it's a huge feat for the both of you, honestly. But so I just want to make sure we also have a chance to kind of complete your story, Carly. Like, because the same question that I asked Brian, what happened? This sort of realization to be where you were like wrapped up with this relationship with this woman. You were also figuring out your sobriety. Like, what happened to your queer identity after coming and after becoming sober?
Totally. A lot.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I mean, I just got so much more comfortable in my own skin, in my identity, and I mean, you get to play around, kind of like what Brian said. Like it's a lifelong process of trying on labels, trying on new things, and seeing how they fit for you. When I first came out, I came out as pansexual, and overall, since then, I've just been a lot more comfortable using the term queer. And with that, I've just grown a lot of pride as someone who is like out and proud and just like able to be at home in queer spaces and have the power to create a queer space now for us where we get to meet other sober queer people, which is so important because now that these are like my two most important values in my life, being sober and being queer, which I never thought I would ever say these words in my life, like but I can honestly say that I've lived more life as my truest self in these last 3.5 years that I've been sober than I ever did in the first 24, pretending to be somebody that I was not. And, I'm just so lucky that my sobriety and sexuality did come wrapped up in this nice present with me with a giant bow on it to unfold. But I know that everybody else's story is super unique. And that figuring yourself out isn't just some final destination that you just arrive at one day. It's all about enjoying the journey as you are on it. So
definitely.
That's me. And I don't know if you want to chime in, Brian, about like how your sexuality and gender identity has evolved over time or if anything has happened since getting sober.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I like how you said, I'm a little jealous of you, Carly, that your sexuality and sobriety were wrapped up in a present because I feel like I didn't get that shit at the beginning. I have a bunch of scattered parts. I think one thing for myself is that my sexuality, I've never questioned that. Like, I love eggplant. I love men. I've always I always know that about myself, that I feel like, more fluid on the gender spectrum kind of thing. And it was something that I never even bothered exploring until I really quit drinking. And I honestly, I mean, even going a step further, until I really, stopped even using marijuana as a crutch in that also kind of brought on its own kind of, okay, like maybe I could try this out for myself. So, I mean, it's just this, I feel you on that. It's just like this evolving track that you're on. I love it.
Totally. I relate to that so much too of like I thought that getting sober was the finish line of my life. I was
Hmm.
like, I figured it out. I got to the end. I did it. I won the race. And then it's like, oh no, girl, you're at the starting line. Like this is the catalyst for everything else that's about to go down. But you don't know that at the time. And so it's just wild. You think you're at the end, but really you're just at the beginning and like just all this life is waiting for you to be lived as a sober person. So it's so exciting.
Sobriety, along with just so many other things like health and fitness, mental health, it's never going to be a destination. It's always going to be a practice. And the more you practice it, it's like a muscle. You get stronger the more you practice it. So I love your story, Carly. Thank you so much for sharing.
Of course. And thank you for sharing as well. And just for everyone that's listening, I know that we both touched on it when we were telling our stories, but there's no prerequisite for calling yourself any label that feel might fit you. There's no qualifiers. You are always queer enough. And it doesn't matter if you've had a relationship that's outwardly queer, you are still queer. It doesn't matter if you had a queer encounter yet, you are still queer. Like there are no rules. Like there is no buddy being the queer police. Like if you're queer, you think you're queer, like explore that. It's so fun, like getting to know yourself. And with that being said too, understanding that your identity, it can be fluid, that it doesn't have to be the same every day, and just having that openness and flexibility with yourself to explore the potential changes that come along. It's so cool and fun. Like it doesn't have to be stressful or like putting yourself in a box. It should feel like you're getting to express yourself, and just that there's nobody else out there that's just like you. So you might as well just live your life as your full self, because that is where you will find your people. That is where you will find exactly where you're supposed to be. So
I think that that's an amazing way to close it out because I first want to thank you both for sharing your stories and being so vulnerable. I would hope that everybody out there and even ourselves can continue to, keep it easy, keep it cool and fun, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like that. But I think that that's definitely a goal to try to hit, whether that is exploring your own relationship with sobriety or your own relationship with your own identity or gender identity. I really do appreciate that because these stories are not something that you tend to hear the end of, or at least, as you said, this is not really the end. This is at least getting over that first mountain and realizing there's another mountain ahead of you. This is kind of a nice place to look back and kind of see how far you guys have come from, and also recognizing that there's still a lot to continue exploring. I think that's an interesting place to be, and this an interesting story to share with everybody. So again, thank you both so much for sharing.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me on. I just have loved, kind of our yin yang kind of stories, and I really hope that people who are watching, we're not necessarily like the right example. Everyone has their own model for their own sobriety, their own queerness, their own sexuality, and I really appreciate all that's been shared today.
For sure. Before we close, is there any last comments that either of you might want to say to our listeners or to just each other?
I couldn't agree more about the like sobriety. You just keep getting these opportunities to level up, and you just get to meet these like better and better versions of yourself. So I think that's really important, that the self-improvement doesn't stop. You just only get better, and you're able to actually like see progress in your life and set goals and actually reach them. Like it's so so fulfilling. Obviously we could be the sobriety spokespeople forever, but I think we are really painting a great message today that your story, no matter what it is unique and it's amazing, and we can't wait to hear it. So whether you want to tell it to us on the podcast or just to yourself or your community, but having that support system in place, I think was something that we both touched on too, which is super important, to be surrounded by people who understand, that support you and love you no matter what identity you want to try on, come out as. And so that's also the key as well. And I'm so grateful to have both of you in my life to be those people for me.
Thank you, Carly. And thank you again. Carly. I think this is probably a good place to wrap up today's episode. So make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one as it comes out. We try to launch an episode every other week.
And be sure to find our podcast on all major platforms and the video podcast on twitch.tv and YouTube. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Chicago Queer Sober Social and contact us at queersobersocial@gmail.com, or leave us a voice message on our Anchor page with any questions or stories you'd like to share with us. Thank you for being a Queer Sober Social podcast listener. And always remember,
you are queer enough.
You are sober enough.
You are
enough.
Thank you all very much for listening in. We're going to take a little bit of a break. I so apologize if you're watching this on I'm trying to do this over a laptop, so it's not working great, but hopefully the audio is coming through all right. We'll definitely shift into our after show mode in just a moment. So stay with us for just a moment. We'll be right back. All righty. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to drink some water, reflect on everything that we were talking through. Welcome to the after show. Again, I cannot apologize enough for the video being just a little choppy, but thankfully I'm hearing that our audio is doing all right. So if you have a chance and you want to join us on chat, you are able to do so right now. So feel free to chat either on YouTube or on Twitch. Either of them work, and they actually share with each other. So somebody who chats on YouTube will be able to see a Twitch chat and vice versa. I will at least attempt to let that continue forward, but let's start the after show.
after show with our first guest,
So
Brian.
excited. It's my first after show.
That's still definitely part of the show.
Yes, an important part of the show at that. I think we just did a great job, and I'm really proud of our stories and how much they like intertwine, but are also so different at the same time.
I completely agree. Like, sometimes when people talk about like getting sober, they're afraid that like nobody will really like understand or be able to share their same experiences. And like, I really hope that somebody was out there listening to us is like, hey, I see myself in that.
Totally. I hope so too. And if you are listening to this and you want to give us a shout out or comment or email us that this had an impact on you, please do, because we'd love to hear from you. We love growing our community, which I don't even think, I mean, I try to touch on it a little bit, but having people in your life that are also sober and queer, like I cannot reiterate enough of how like that has changed my life completely. It helps you gain a better perspective of yourself because you're able to just show up so authentically and not be judged by perhaps friends that maybe knew you when you were drinking or knew you when you were in the closet, and you're just meeting people for the first time that have also been on their own journey, and just having a group of people that have queerness and sobriety in common are two like major life values that if those align with you, that you're going to find your people immediately.
I totally agree with that, Carly. Like, it completely contradicts FOMO. Like if you have this fear of missing out, but you're able to find, like I'm getting sober, I'm going to miss out on all this stuff. But then you find a community of sober queer people. I mean, for myself, that was huge for me. When you think about getting sober and thinking you're going to be the only one doing it, that kind of sounds shitty, but like, with a community, it's huge.
Definitely. And interestingly enough, like even for someone who has gone through that process of becoming sober, there's still a lot of stuff that applies. And even hearing your guys' stories of just trying to figure things out and trying to like make it work and, breaking out of certain expectations and labels, like that's a universal story. So I think that that's something that everybody can really take something away from, regardless of where you're coming from.
I completely agree.
Same here. Completely agree.
I know that you talked about like the loss a little bit, Brian, that comes with getting sober. And I've seen this thing that's like you have to trade in every aspect of your life, but what you get in return is so much better than what you could ever imagine. But it's just like that letting go of that part of your personality, of your identity, letting go of friends. Like there is a significant amount of loss that comes with getting sober, and that's the fear. But on the other side of it, you don't know how much is out there that you're going to gain, and you gain yourself back. You gain access to the person that you've always wanted to be that you were never able to get to before. Kind of what I was saying, where I would read all these self-help books and I'm just like, I can see the person in my head who I want to be, but somehow there's just like this glass wall. I don't know. I just couldn't break through. I couldn't get to her. And the glass wall was drinking and drugs. And I saw, once you see it and you can't unsee it and you don't want to let go of it because it's the only way that you've ever known. But once you're willing to like walk away and accept the loss, and just it opens up your whole life for so many bigger things that are out there for you. I know it's scary. We've gone through it.
Exactly. I mean, but the thing is like the longer you do it, I mean, I said it before, it doesn't feel like a loss. Carly, like with your story, I 100% identify when you said, I will do anything in the book except getting sober, like anything else, but except getting sober. And like, I think about that with my fitness journey, like I would factor in alcohol into my daily not weekend calories, my daily calories, so I tried, and obviously that doesn't work. So it's just like, but once you're able to just like free yourself from that, it changes everything.
For sure. I can definitely imagine that. Sorry to not really have a lived experience with that, but kind of seeing you both and talk about your own journeys is definitely that I could see for sure. One thing that I maybe wanted to just make sure we quickly touch on is as you were talking about this community growing, I wanted to shout out a couple more people who have followed our channel since the last time we ended up streaming. Let's see if this actually works on stream. But at the very least, I want to make sure I read out you guys' names. So, thank you very much to Baguette Cat 12318. Maybe that will pop up, maybe not. We'll see. And then also to Ash Royer 23. Thank you both very much for joining our channel. And I hope that you enjoy our previous content. Hey, something played. Let's see if it actually works and shows up. Whatever. But thank you, both of you.
That's so awesome. And thank you everyone that's here and that's been listening and following us and supporting us. We really couldn't do without you. And we're just so happy to be here and telling the queer and sober stories that we know so badly need to be out there in the world, because I needed to hear this stuff when I was figuring myself out, because I felt like Brian said, like, if you once you know you're not alone and that this is all normal and that we're here for you, like, it makes a world of difference in what your life has to be like. Just knowing that you are not alone, like, you don't have to feel that way ever, and as long as you are here with us, you're in good company.
Exactly. I maybe wanted to switch gears because there's a couple of other things that I wanted to make sure we hit during our, after show period. As we're kind of getting into winter, because we only stream once every other week, I feel like we have to be a PSA at sometimes. Last time it was about signing up for the Georgia runoffs. This time it might be around COVID testing. So regardless of if you went home for Thanksgiving or if you decided to stay home, or whatever that might be, just know that there are options out there for you in case you do want to get tested and be a little bit safer as you move into winter, and maybe want to figure out ways to hang out with people or create your own little quarantine pod or something like that. I just happened to go through another test this past week, and instead of the nasopharyngeal, which is the one where they go like all the way back up to your brain, basically, they only just go halfway up. So it's a lot more comfortable, in case that was any sort of sticking point for anybody. I do also know that a lot of insurances are still covering COVID tests for essentially free. And you just might need to call them or try to figure out exactly which test that they might cover. Because I know that there's some that are covering the antibody test, which is a separate test, and some that are actually covering the nose test. So just a heads up for everybody, and something that is out there for you guys. Of Thanksgiving, Carly, a little bit about our Queersgiving that we had.
Thanksgiving, more like thanks living.
Amazing.
100% Trixie Mattel. We threw our first annual Queersgiving this year. It was virtual on Zoom, and we gathered anyone and everyone who wanted to come, hang out, kick back, relax, eat your leftovers, and it was really fun. It was nice to get to see everyone, and as I know, we all know, sometimes the holiday season can be a little harder for us queer folks. So it was just really nice to be able to carve out a space and time for everyone to come together and feel supported if you needed it. I know I did. And we had a really good time. We played some Jackbox games, which were silly. Brian told us what they would be if they were any Thanksgiving food, and not laughed that hard in a long time. So I'm just really, really, really grateful for our group, grateful for all the relationships that I have with all of y'all. And I am so happy that we get to do this again for Christmas, for Queersmas. And those events will be going up soon, Queersmas and New Queer's Eve. I think we're going to stick with that name.
We got to figure out more holidays with, long vowels so we can make it work with queer.
It's hard because Halloween was literally made for the LGBTQ community, so we have to find a new name for all the other.
Definitely.
Yes. We love the creativity, but it's so fun to come together. And I know for me personally too, like, the holidays are a time where drinking was aplenty, and it still is that way for many people. Like Blackout Wednesday was very much a prominent day in my life, and Christmas as well. Just, I think it's really, I'm in such a place of gratitude that we get to create this space that is so needed. And like I said too, when we were in Queersgiving last night, of like, I can't wait till we get to have Queersgiving together in person. Like how awesome that will be, and like have a potluck and play games in person, and really get to like get into the holiday spirit with one another, because that is like what it's all about.
Definitely. I think that day is feeling far off, but in the grand scheme of things, is not really that far off. So hopefully that comes along soon, for sure.
I'm holding out hope for 2021. I really think it's going to happen.
Crossing my fingers.
I hope so too. I think the important thing is that we know, even in the short time that we've had the group together, that these are friendships that are going to be lasting a lifetime, and going to be lasting until however many future Thanksgivings that we get to have. So even though this is just a blip in time of the pandemic, just walking away from this time and building something that I know is going to outlast it is really, really cool.
I 100% agree. Well, speaking of this group and things that we've done together, just before Thanksgiving, I think we actually watched a movie together. I don't want to spoil anything, so that's one thing I want to lead with. So, but I did want to get your guys' reactions to the movie that we watched. Brian, you were on there too, right?
So Brian did not watch, but you can let us know your thoughts on the movie.
Oh, well, have you seen it?
For sure. No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, the movie that we were watching was Happy Season, which apparently just came out on Hulu. It has a bunch of people, most of the people. I don't remember all the names, so Carly, you'd have to help me out there.
Yeah, I mean the cast is stacked. There is Kristen Stewart and Dan Levy, and it was created by Theo Duvall.
Oh, it was that movie. Okay, I saw the advertisements for it. Okay, yeah. Okay, perfect.
But Aubrey Plaza looking like a real snack. It was, the cast is great. Rajiv, you can get us started with your thoughts on it. We watched it together as a group, which was really fun, and hearing everybody's feedback in the chat that we had during it was awesome too.
It was nice. I think the timing of it was a little interesting. It was literally as I was driving home, or well, not driving and watching, but like being driven home to the suburbs, to go for Thanksgiving stuff. My immediate family is in my own personal COVID bubble, so it has worked out like that. But it's still, it. The overall story just made me feel. It didn't feel, even though it was a holiday movie. Like you can kind of guess at like the three different directions that holiday movies go. Even though that was pretty much the story, it was still, like it felt a little too real, or a little bit too familiar in a lot of ways. And again, I'm trying not to spoil stuff, so I'm like talking around a lot of the plot. But if you do watch it, you will probably, if you've gone through the coming out process with your own family, or whatever that might look like for you, like that will feel familiar in some way, shape, or form. And I don't know, a lot of people found it just like a nice story, which it definitely was. It was an interesting movie. I think it was a good movie. I don't know. It just made me feel a little bit like different coming out of it than I did like going into it. Overall, I don't know if you felt that same way, Carly, but I'd be interested in your own reactions on it too.
Yeah, I was excited for it. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I think I had high expectations, and not that it didn't deliver. I was just like it went in a different direction than I thought. And it also impacted me in a different way than I thought. I thought like I was going to leave the movie feeling a different way than I did, because I left feeling pretty triggered. And I didn't know that was going to happen. But at least like this time I was able to recognize what was happening and kind of sit with my feelings. And I ended up doing like a lot of self-care after the movie wrapped, which helps me a lot, because then I was able to just like wake up the next day and be like, okay, I gotta drive home now. Like I needed to do that like self-care. Otherwise, like you said, the timing of the movie of like they purposely released it the night before Thanksgiving because they knew probably a lot of queer folks were gonna be with their families and wanting to give them something to like relate to, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a lot of feelings about it too, but I you know, it's very personal. Everyone's like coming out story is different. Everyone's relationships with their family is different. And to try to capture all of that in like this movie, they tried their best. They did a good job with like what they were doing, but it left me also kind of feeling the same way that you did of like, huh.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't exactly look exactly like this. So where's my movie about my
Yeah, definitely. Certainly, like not all of us have the same family situation for sure. And I think that that's kind of an interesting thing to kind of pop up like that. I think also it was around just, I think what they were trying to do was both hit the queer audience as well as like the family audience, if that makes any sense. Because like I felt it was a little bit educational at times, if that made any sense, because like they were explaining some pretty basic concepts that people who would be watching this from the queer community would probably already know. And so it kind of felt like that they were trying to target just like the family that might be sitting around after Thanksgiving watching this with their queer son or daughter or child in one way, shape, or form. But that is kind of what also got me, because like that felt like, I don't know, like it was trying to do two things at once. And not saying that it was a bad movie because of it, but just that also is probably what contributed to me feeling a specific way, because like it felt like it was also they knew what they were doing, like you said, Carly, and kind of that feeling that came up at the end of it was just a little bit exacerbated because of the fact that they were trying to also make sure that it was a little bit better for anybody that might come after us.
Yeah, I agree with that analysis a bit. Actually, though, like I think I mentioned this a little bit too, both outside of this podcast episode, but I think watching that movie and putting my story down to paper for this episode really put me in a good spot to like have a good conversation with my family when I was there, which was very surprising. But I think that's also part of the reason why I felt so triggered at the end of the movie because I was like, felt like I wanted to be having the conversations like they were having in the movie or like having that feeling of like my family understanding something about me better. So that was kind of unexpected and cool. And I think I can attribute that to the movie a little bit too. And so I'm walking away. I'm good. I don't think I need to watch it again. I think it did its job in my life. So I don't know. With that, Brian, of hearing us both talk about it,
Right, exactly. I was going to ask you what you were thinking based on us dancing around
Oh
plot
my
points.
God, I know. I'm like, I have such mixed feelings, but like, I mean, the kind of things that you guys are talking about, like, I so identify with that, like coming out to your family and all that. And I just don't know if I'm personally in the spot to be triggered right now. So I will take your word for how good the movie was, and if it was just a one-time watch, I'll think about it. But I'm okay without being triggered.
I would say like give it a watch after you go back home. Like not with your family. Don't do it like during Thanksgiving or whatever, or Christmas or whatever. Like just watch it on your own time and feel the feelings that you need to.
Oh, for sure. Because I mean, so like a little side note with that, you know, I come from like a completely heteronormative family, you know,
Sure.
older brother engaged, having the nice little, you know, West Loop white wedding and all that. And so like the holidays can be pretty triggering when people are talking about all that stuff. So I mean, I'll definitely have to think about that, you know.
for sure. And I think that's kind of what the movie brought up in general. But I think you are doing a good segue into us wanting to kind of give the listeners a little bit of background about you. If you wanted to tell kind of more of your like origin story instead of doing it such through a lens of your identity and sobriety. So feel free to give us some more background on you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks again for just like giving me this platform. I was like so excited to share all this stuff today. So outside of being very gay and, and all this, after everything I just shared with you guys, I am 27 years old and I currently live in Humboldt Park here in Chicago, quarantining here since March. I'm going back to school in January to become a Spanish teacher. I love languages. I speak 3 languages fluently. I love traveling. I've lived in Spain. I just love learning about cultures and stuff. In my free time, I like to collect postcards. I know that's like a little, I know you guys didn't really necessarily know that.
No, we did.
I actually commissioned someone from our group to make me one.
Wow,
Because
fancy.
I love them so much. I love them so much, just from everywhere, you know. And I really love, I'm back, kind of living my life again. So I'm back in like the fitness scene and all of that. During this quarantine in 2020, I've lost 35 pounds, just from not drinking anymore, taking my health seriously. And I'm looking long-term goals to compete in a bodybuilding competition, but that's gonna, take some time. I love animals. I love trying. I have a cat. His name is Leonardo DiCaprio, but we just call him Leo for short. His girlfriend is Kat Winslet. He is straight, unfortunately. He's not like Bruiser from Legally Blonde. And I just love trying new foods. And in my free time, when things are actually open, I love exploring. Like, since we all live here in Chicago, we love exploring the city. Every neighborhood has something really interesting in it. There's always something to do, something to eat, something to see. So just kind of exploring this new era of my 20s, of my late 20s.
Well, I think that's a wonderful background, Brian. And of course, like sets up to share a little bit more about you other than just kind of the exploration that you've been doing outside of just the sobriety and sexuality and gender identity types of questions. So thank you again for introducing yourself like more fully, because sorry in the actual podcast, but also just kind of sharing a little bit more about yourself, so that way then people can see you as more than just the person that they might hear if they decide to listen back to this on Spotify or whatever.
Thanks. I just think it's so important for people, when they're hearing these kind of stories, that not all, that there's an actual person behind all of this, that, substance abuse is not a moral failing. It's just a physical reaction to something. And there's a whole person behind, the story that they're sharing. So thanks again for giving me this platform.
For sure. So Carly, would you like to talk about anything else, or just because of the video stuff and things like that, I might want to end it here otherwise?
Yeah, I think this has been great. I enjoy talking to you both so much. I think we had a really powerful conversation, and I'm so happy that Brian was our first official podcast guest.
I 100% agree. What a wonderful first guest to have, and certainly one out of many. Welcome, Brian. You're on the rocket ship to the moon, basically. So when people, look back at the original few episodes of this, they'll see your name. So welcome.
Thank you so much. You guys are going to go to the moon. Sorry, I had to put a RuPaul reference.
Amazing. Well,
I love that.
Well, again, thank you everybody for sticking it out. Sorry again for the video, and hopefully the audio has been good. The people on on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever will not know all of these issues, because we will fix it in post as we usually do. So, thank you all again for watching this. We will be back in 2 weeks to talk about something else. I forgot what the next episode is about. Oh, mental health, if I remember right. So definitely an episode that you don't want to miss, because as Carly was talking about, like the holidays can be a little tough for a lot of queer people. And certainly mental health is tied into that, especially with winter coming up. Doesn't matter what you identify as. it doesn't matter. It matters a lot if you don't get that sunlight. So come to talk to us in a couple weeks.
Bye.
Alrighty. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.